Welcome to Science Fiction, Race, and Racism. This is a video blog and channel about the most famous and influential works in science fiction and how they deal with issues of race, ethnicity, racism, prejudice, and intolerance. Both the best and the worst. The most groundbreaking and insightful, and the most callous and clueless. Science fiction has a long history of both being opposed to racism, prejudice, and intolerance, but also of conscious or unconscious racism. Sci-fi fans, authors, and works are often said to be above, beyond, incapable of, and far past any prejudice. That is often the appeal of sci-fi, especially the most utopian works. Sometimes a sci-fi setting, story, or theme can be another way to comment upon, critique, or tear apart prejudice and hatred. For others, sci-fi is pure escapism, a way to get away from such issues. Sometimes this backfires. The most escapist sci-fi work is often the most racist. Sometimes the same three approaches or beliefs coexist within a work of sci-fi, within an author, or within a sci-fi fan. My name is Carroll. I'm Associate Professor of History at Northern Virginia Community College. I teach American, American Indian, and Latin American history. I've written mostly about wars, veterans, human rights, and genocide. I've also written some sci-fi, mostly alternate history, including a sci-fi alternate history book, The Man in Black, the first of a series. One of the most racist sci-fi franchises of all time was Buck Rogers. It was conceived as explicitly and unashamedly racist propaganda of the most vicious kind. Buck Rogers began as a pulp book, Armageddon 2419 AD. Written in 1928, it imagines a U.S. taken over by, quote, Mongolians. These, quote, Mongolians attack whites with airships and disintegrator rays. White Americans are forced to live in the wild. The Mongolians are then renamed the Han, as in Han Chinese, the largest ethnic group in China. The original story imagined Buck Rogers awakening from suspended animation only to rescue the female heroine, Wilma Deering, from, quote, bad bloods, non-whites, or mixed-race American gangs allied with the Han. Writer Philip Nolan wrote a sequel, The Heirlords of Han. The second novel ends with the outright genocide of the Han by white Americans, and a series of racist rants glorifying it, even cheering it as needed for the defense of the white race. It is the same speeches and fantasies one would today only see in the most extreme works by Nazis, KKK, and other white supremacists. Published and then republished in early sci-fi magazine Amazing Stories, founded by Hugo Gernsback, then run by John Campbell. The two publishers excluded authors who weren't white males, and Gernsback's proposed solution to racism, even to the end of his life in 1967, was to genetically alter anyone not white to white. Seeing these stories, newspaper publisher John Dill wanted Nolan to turn the books into daily comic strips for his nationwide newspaper chain. Buck Rogers became the first sci-fi comic strip. The book's violence and military strategy was lessened, and Buck Rogers was shown awakening to an America that had not been occupied, but the open racism continued in the comic strip. Buck Rogers was enormously influential upon sci-fi and comic books, pulp novels, radio, film, and finally TV, imitated by Flash Gordon and John Carter of Mars. Buck Rogers became 4 different radio serials for most of the next 20 years, until 1947. It also became a popular film serial in 1939, starring Olympic swimmer Buster Crabbe. Unlike the TV series in the 1980s, until the TV series in the 1980s, this was the best-known version of Buck Rogers. Buster Crabbe had already starred in Flash Gordon. Many of the same elements in Flash Gordon were also in Buck Rogers, even reusing some of the same sets. Both had the same savior of the white race storyline. Crabbe was also conspicuously Aryan-looking, even with his hair slightly darkened to light brown, and with the heroine, a red-haired white actress from Iowa, Constance Moore. While the series' concept was openly racist, there's no sign Crabbe himself ever was. The villains are always shown as their darkness, their dark hair and skin, being what not only signifies them as evil, but what makes them evil. dangerous, and threatening. Instead of whites in yellowface, as in Flash Gordon, in Buck Rogers the villain was Anthony Ward, a German-American made to look Middle Eastern or Mediterranean, wearing clothing that looks Arab, Persian, or Indian. Kane is both the dictator of Earth and Saturn, but also a former gangster. In Buck Rogers, the sole Asian or other non-white actor is Korean-American Philip Ahn. 40 years later, he would be best known as one of the monks and kung fu masters in the 1970s TV series Kung Fu. In Buck Rogers, he plays an alien, the Prince of Saturn, but his dress resembles a Chinese warrior. Later comic strips in the 1940s turned into anti-Japanese, racist rants. Buck Rogers comic strips and comic books continued until 1967, when the Civil Rights Movement made such open racism hard to defend. Then in 1979, these comic strips and comic books came back when the Buck Rogers film and TV series began. The film was an obvious attempt to cash in on the popularity of Star Wars, and was poorly received. It was supposed to be a TV movie, and then was released to theaters. Buck Rogers was changed from a fighter pilot to a NASA astronaut who somehow immediately masters technology from 500 years in the future. The film and series brought back the post-apocalyptic future with nuclear war, destroying almost all the Earth. Where Buster Crabbe had been a blonde athlete, Gil Gerard was a brown-haired soap opera actor. The bigger change was Wilma Deering. In the serial, she was constantly rescued. In the film, she is commander of Earth Defense Forces. But this commander of all Earth's military also wears skin-tight spandex, and her hair is lightened from naturally black to almost blonde. Later she was allowed to return closer to her natural color, but she was also demoted to a second-in-command of a shuttle, and only as a pilot who wears an outfit much like a stewardess. The entire cast of Buck Rogers the series was all white, even minor characters and extras. The main characters were all white American or British. Seemingly the nuclear holocaust wiped out Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Mideast, even Europe outside of Great Britain. All of humanity lived in a single city, presumably descended from white elites who survived the H-bombs. The implication is Americans and English were the victors in a war which wiped out China and the Soviets, almost like the original comics and comic strips. The bad guys this time are the Draconians, with Emperor Draco. Except for guest star Gary Coleman, all the non-white characters in the Buck Rogers series played aliens. Or these non-white aliens were played by whites made to appear darker, thus alien. Emperor Draco is an obvious imitation of Ming the Merciless, with yellow Peril imagery returning. He dresses in Chinese imperial robes, has a Fu Manchu mustache and goatee, dark in skin, played by Joseph Weisman. Weisman was a Jewish actor, best known for playing another Yellow Peril character, the James Bond villain Dr. No. In later life, Weisman said he regretted playing these characters. The Emperor's daughter, Princess Ardala, was a very popular character, mostly with horny males. She dresses like male fantasies of harem women or belly dancers. German-American actress Pamela Hensley portrayed Ardala in Arabface. She wears harem clothing, dark eye makeup, and a tan. And she has guards made to look like Arabs, called Tigermen, who are always menacing nearby. Ardala is squarely in the femme fatale and dragon lady traditions, with a mix of the Pocahontas fantasy, the non-white female who prefers the white male over her own kind, both white supremacist fantasies of non-white women. Latino actor Henry Silva played Killer Kane in the film, a human who sides with the Draconians. The only non-white humans in Buck Rogers, except for Coleman, are shown as traitors to Earth. Later, Syrian-Lebanese actor Michael Ansara played a different Kane in the series His Brother. This repeats the earlier racist argument from the Buck Rogers books, where any human, not white, sided with aliens trying to conquer Earth. In this almost all-white future, the only positive, non-white character was Hieronymus Fox, played by child actor Gary Coleman. Fox is a scientific genius and a source of comedy relief. Like Buck Rogers, he was frozen cryogenically, coming from 500 years before. This fits with the series showing everyone not white outside of America or England wiped out by nuclear war. Coleman was best known for playing the series Different Strokes, playing a black child adopted by a wealthy white man. In the late 1970s, it became a trend to have cute, funny black children adopted by white fathers in TV comedies, the least threatening image of blacks possible. In the second season, the alien species of hawk people were introduced. Tom Christopher played mostly Italian gangsters, and this time played the character of Hawk. Filipina actress Barbara Luna, best known for a role on Star Trek, played Hawk's wife Kuri. Again, most of the few non-whites in the series played aliens. The plot showed Hawk's people wiped out by humans, and Hawk seeking revenge on all humans. This attempt to have serious sci-fi led to it being cancelled. Those who like the series like its cheesy, silly nature, or they like it for childhood nostalgia reasons, either not knowing or ignoring its genocidal origins and its casual exclusion in the 1970s series. In the 1980 sequels to the original Buck Rogers were written based on outlines by noted sci-fi author Larry Niven's and Jerry Pournelle, two conservatives among the few in the science community who endorsed Ronald Reagan's Star Wars plans. This time the villains of the Han were rewritten as aliens called the Peril. There were a few comics, a few video games, a few more paperbacks as late as the early 1990s. There was even a role-playing game in the 90s which brought back the theme of race war. There was an attempt at a web series reviving Buck Rogers in the 2000s. It failed, getting barely a tenth of its goal of $25,000 from a Kickstarter campaign. Buck Rogers' time is long gone. Its harsh racism that originally made it popular, now a burden. Its main legacy is the phrase Buck Rogers, used as a shorthand for silly sci-fi. This is the end of the 9th video. I look forward to your comments and questions. Please repost freely, like, share, and comment. Next video we will discuss Flash Gordon and the Yellow Peril. This has been Science Fiction, Race, and Racism video blog and channel.